Good evening. Welcome to The Next Word. I'm your host, Chris Warnke, and tonight we have a guest who's no stranger to business. She actually lives in Montgomery County here in the district, and she is from Albania. She is the ambassador, Floreta Faber, from Albania to the United States. And she is going to talk about the country, her people, the huge diaspora here in the United States. So we're excited. And thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Oh my God, I'm so
here
happy
tonight.
because people, I want people to know about Albania.
And Albania, it is
situated in the middle of the Balkan.
It is a small country, and few people know about it. And I'm happy that I'm doing this discussion in Montgomery County, where actually I live.
Right.
And my children go in schools in this neighborhood, so it was an interesting match.
Perfect.
After I was invited to the show, but
yes.
I'm happy that I could speak about my country, because everywhere I go, people start with a basic question: where the country is and what the history. And it's to talk about my country, as for every Albanian. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's difficult, because Albania has. I always like to say, has three histories. Has the very ancient and 100 years of history, has the modern history when it became a state since 1912, and has the new history of democracy, which came after 1990. Probably I could start with a very ancient history of Albania. Albanians are there since thousands of years.
You get to Kruja, the first autonomous state in the Middle Ages, known as the Principality of Arbour. It is home to the Albanian national hero, George Kastrioti Skanderbeg, who fought against the Ottoman Empire and raising the importance of the city in the eyes of the Europeans.
In the 15th century, we had the national hero who gathered all the Albanian principles, and they acknowledged Albania as one state for the first time.
The people of Kruja continue to keep its traditions and heritage alive. With the highest number of foreign visitors, Kruja still preserves the tradition of craftsmanship, customs, and folk history told in the streets of the old bazaar.
He was fighting to keep the Ottoman from coming to the rest of Europe, and Albanians had him as a commander, as a head of state, as a diplomat, as someone who got all the Albanian principals together. And this is for the first time we see the signs of Albanian flag and Albanian as a country. After he passed away, for another 20 years, we could keep the Ottomans, but then they had the big empire, and Albania was under the Ottoman Empire.
As Greece, as the whole of it.
Albania, was part of the Ottoman Empire for about 500 years. 500 years, until we declared our independence in 1912. What's interesting, Albania has always been between the culture, between the Greek culture and the Roman culture, but we had our own part on the European history and European cultures. Albania has its own language, which is Albanian. It's part of Indo-European languages, but we have it as our own. So it's not part of Latin, it's not part of German or Slavic, as many believe we are. And Albanians saved it for the 500 years they were under the Ottomans. And in 1912, all the Albanians declared independence, and the state and this is where we can come to probably talk about history of Albanians here in the United States. You asked me a little bit before we started the show. Albania and United States has a very interesting history in the last 100 years. The reason why is because diaspora here in the United States has played a tremendous role in recognizing Albania as a state. In 1919, it was the President Woodrow Wilson who recognized Albania as its own state. And it was exactly now 10 years ago, with the support of United States, that Kosovo was called an independent country. The reason why I'm mentioning Kosovo is because Albania and Kosovo are Albanian nation, but two different states in the Balkan. Albania, since then, after 1912, is known as, it's a small country which has a characteristic that in all the neighborhood, almost all the villages, to the other states, they all speak Albanian. It's the same with Kosovo, the same with Macedonia, the same with Montenegro. And Albania is inside of two seas, it's Ionian and Adriatic. And this is generally where our geography stands.
And the Ionian Sea is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Along with the Adriatic.
Especially the south, the south part of our coast is something which has become really attractive. Yes. It has always been there, but I think people have just discovered.
Did not realize it. Yes, it's just becoming, I mean, more and more known.
I think
like
we can go back to show how not only beautiful but also how welcoming the south and the north and all parts of the Albania are. This is where the other side of history, I would say, start. As an independent country, we had, of course, our own development. After then, the Second World War happened, and after 1944, Albania became one of the socialist or communist countries. And this is where the country started the next phase of the history. Until 1990, Albania was very closed. It was not open to the rest of the world. People were not allowed to travel. They had not freedom of their speech. They had no freedom of religion. They were not allowed by law, to practice religion. And so everyone lived under one ideology, that it was of the party in power, and only one political party was allowed. But internally, Albanians were and are the same people, very friendly, very welcoming, very open to each other, as much as they could, as long as you wouldn't go to the political side of the discussions. The society is very open, especially for educating the families and the children. And the country has its own issues, but they were trying to build the economy internally, which it looked for some years probably worked, but then because there was no relations, and especially the economic relations with outside of the world, we believe we could do everything in our own. We can build factories, we could build, I don't know, tractors, buses, cars. We did all of that, but because of the economies of scale, they all collapsed. By the end of the 80s, Albania was part of all Eastern Europe. It was part of the changes, and after the Berlin Wall came down, then strong movements came in every part of Eastern Europe, and of course in Albania too. In many countries, the changes came in different forms, sometimes more in formats of demonstration, sometimes violence. Albania was, in the end of 1990, there were big demonstrations, especially from young people. And what they asked first, it was open the society and have the opportunity of having more than one political parties. So that was the strong request for freedom, for democracy, for the freedom of speech. And it was not easy, but the leaders, the new leaders that were requesting for change, sat together with the previous leaders in the country, and the change was done. So when it was agreed, then more than one political party was allowed in the country. That was a big change.
Yeah, huge.
In the middle of the 90s, unfortunately, there was a big move of Albanians outside of Albania. For everyone who knows some history of our country in that part, They might remember that in July that year we had about 4,000 or 5,000 people going to the foreign embassies in the country, and they left the country altogether. It was kind of a strong pressure of the past. It was a pressure on things that you were not allowed to do, and it was a strong pressure on the economic situation in the country. Young families who were looking for a better life for their children and for themselves. And it was a time where they believed they can do everywhere better than in Albania.
And they went
to Italy, Greece, to Germany, majority in the neighbor countries, a lot of them in Germany, some to England. But they requested where to go, and they were accepted. I think that was a very positive and welcoming move from Europe. So people were given the chance to go where they wanted to. And for the ones who left until the last moment, they didn't know what would happen to them. Albania came from a history where if you wanted to cross the border, you could even get shot in the border. But the pressure of those people for freedom was so strong, so they said, we can try. They did not go to the embassies all in one day. It took about a week or 10 days, but it was like, let's see, let's try what's happening. If I get killed, probably that was my story. Right. And in 1991, we had the first election. One thing I should mention probably, for the first time, we reopened the diplomatic relations with the United States that March. In 1991. It was reopened because we did have diplomatic relations and ambassadors since 1920s in both countries. And a very well-known ambassador here in Washington, D.C. for 20 years, Fani Konica, played a very important role in the relationship between the countries. This was in beginning of 90s. It was a part where we signed most of our relations between the countries and a number of agreements between the countries. And in 91, it was like opening the diplomatic relations for Albania was like the big next step after they became a democratic country and they were allowed more than political party. It was a time where big changes started. The changes in the country, there are many ways to express. First, it was political because people were allowed to vote for the party they wanted, which would be left or right in the first place, and that was a big change for us. Albanians were used to always go to the voting station and they would basically say yes or no. And even having a new mindset wasn't quite, so people were not quite relaxed even to do that, I believe, in 91. So, and then in 92 we had other elections where the first opposition by then won, and the big changes were not only politics, but they started also in economy.
Which is your, and Ambassador, we're going to have to take a short break.
Okay.
But I want to hear about this because this is, I know this is where you started, and
absolutely.
And we'll be right back. We'll come back to that.
Thank you.
You're watching The Next Word. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
To get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
Good evening. Welcome to The Next Word. I'm your host, Chris Warnke, and tonight we're having a conversation with the ambassador from Albania to the United States, Floreta Faber. I love the name Floreta Faber. What a wonderful name. And this has been so interesting. So we left off.
Yeah, we left off where really the changes
were occurring, especially in the economy.
Absolutely.
Which is your area, since before that you were with the American Chamber in Albania.
Actually, I've been working with business since in 1990s. I finished my education in 1990, which means I was educated totally 100% for a planned economy.
Oh, wonderful.
And,
so no wonder you're so successful. You were so successful in the chamber.
I had the chance to study afterwards on free market economy, so that helped me for the rest of what I did. But the changes started to happen also in economy. Until 1995, it's interesting to know that there was no tax system in Albania. There was no value-added tax. There were no personal tax.
Really?
So people came from a state-owned economy. Even though they all paid taxes in their own way, you wouldn't see that in your paperwork. So even for people to start paying taxes, individuals, was a big change. Was a big thing. And of course, it was the same for companies. It was the same for companies who would take a risk. There were big changes in society. You'll start to see non-for-profit organizations, NGOs, that went after young people, women's issues.
Really?
The first sign, unfortunately, of trafficking of people you would see, because people would leave the country still, but some of them were young, not campaign.
Right.
So there were a lot of movement which tried to keep the country together. And we had, unfortunately, a big pyramid scheme in the country in '97. But after that, the country started really to go back and reconstructing. Even though we had this issue, one of the biggest industries was the construction. And people started to build houses, high buildings, to build businesses. You would see international companies coming in.
A lot of Italian companies, correct?
Italian, Greek, European, Austrian, big banks. Albanian American Enterprise Fund played a big role, especially after 2000, because they would come on with investments in the country, and you would see infrastructure, roads. Albania became a strong partner in security issues. In 2009, Albania became a NATO country. Right. We became a candidate country for European Union in 2014, and we hope to open negotiations this year
for the
in
EU,
2018 to the EU. So they were all the elements of state building, of democracy, of opening the society, of people changing the mindset, being ready for big businesses. We are talking now for a country which came after this long road to a place where people are looking specific to go and visit because of the tourism attractions and because the opportunities it offers for businesses. Albania is really a beautiful country. Yes. If you would decide to go for tourism in Albania, it's very difficult to answer straight the question, because we have the sea, we have the deep waters, we have mountains, we have hiking, biking, whitewater rafting, you can go skiing, and they are all options that have brought Albania in the top 10 lists, especially in the last 2-3 years. We had an increase on tourism over 20% yearly. Really? And we have been working to be able to support this increase of tourism coming. And we have many sites of UNESCO's that people like to visit. We have old history, and this is part. And on top of all this, you see Albanians and very welcoming, very open to the West generally, very open to United States. Albanians are really pro-American in many ways. We have a show in Albania which says you have to love the country as much as Albanians love Americans. Of course, this is a show that for many years started like that. But it's, as I mentioned in the beginning, United States played a big role for recognizing Albania as a state in the beginning of last century, and played a big role in recognizing Kosovo as a state 10 years ago.
The historical importance of Vlora is the Declaration of Independence in 1912. The National Historical Museum of Vlora is the office where the father of the nation, Ismail Qamali, gathered the first independent government of Albania.
Relations between the country and recognizing the country. But then there are a lot of Albanians who are well known in the world. And we are always happy with the first one we all start, you know. Mother Teresa is Albanian.
Which I did not know.
And we are very proud that she synthesized actually all the, we believe, the Albanian spirit and the Albanian hospitality and the love for Albanians.
I had no idea. I didn't realize that she was...
Yeah, and Ferit Murat is Albanian. He's a receiver of people. Actually, I brought a book here. There is an Albanian-American success story. There is a book which shows a number of Albanians who have given to United States, have given to the world history. As I started to mention, Ferit Murat was one of the Nobel Prize winners. And if you ask what he did, probably you wouldn't remember. But if I mention that he was the one who invented Viagra, probably people would remember that.
Oh, did he really? That's great.
And John and Jim Belushi, they are Albanian origin too.
Oh, really? Belushi? Yeah.
Yes, as brothers. So this is just to name a few. You know, I can mention sopranos of today and actors like Elisa Dushku and people who are really our best ambassadors in the world and in here. This is the ones we more are proud of. Sometimes even think what's the best way to keep them in Albania, then leave them go to the world. And we try to do both. I am so happy when I see them all looking for programs in Albania because they want to see their country and their names flourish in the same way. What else I can mention? Albanian economy is really, it's sometimes difficult to go from.
Fascinating. But more about, can I ask you something about going back to you?
Okay.
Because you were a business person. You've been doing that for what?
I've been working with businesses since beginning of 90s, really in 1990, this is where I started. And I've been working with them until I became ambassador here in the United States.
What an honor.
In 1990, I was working with a company which would do trade between my town and the next town, which is Podgorica in Montenegro. And then it became a chamber of commerce. So I really had a chance to support I can recall who was company number 1 or 2 or 3, which were registered as private businesses in my town. And when I returned,
was your company? Was that
I never had my own business.
But this was some company.
I was always working in support of the business community. I worked with Deloitte & Touche for 5 years, and then I came back in 2000, working with the American Chamber of Commerce, and that was it was a really a gold mine for supporting the businesses in the country. The American Chamber was supporting the American companies in the country, but also was supporting
the trade,
the best way. What was the best way to do business inside, and how you could talk with the government, how you can speak up, how you can ask for changes in the law, how you can better do to bring more investments in the country. So me being here was a part of increasing the trade and bringing more American companies to the country. And I believe I came in a very interesting time.
Interesting time. So President Obama,
I delivered
you presented your credentials?
I presented my credentials in May 2015 to President Obama. It was a great event for me and my family, and representing my country. It was really an opportunity which since then I've tried my best to do whatever I can to really give more to those to the relationship. As I mentioned, between the countries, Albania and the United States, is a strong relationship since 1991. The relationship doesn't come simply as a support from the United States, but Albanians have been always open to give as much as they could to this partnership. Albania has become now a role in the region and more to security and stability. We have been partnering with United States and NATO, and we have troops in Iran and Afghanistan. And
really?
We are putting different programs to play a better role in a better neighborhood. Albania was, so all the countries around us as coming from a conflict and wars in the beginning of, since 1990s, Albania was never part of it, but it was impacting us because they were all neighbor countries. So when they look at the region, they don't quite know where Albania is, where other countries is, but I still have the question, are you still in the war? But I say, we never were in the war. Oh, do you speak Russian? We never spoke Russian, but your language is Slavic. No, our language is not Slavic. So there are many misconceptions.
Right, yes.
And it's not simply membership in NATO which made us be better. It was like a starting point where we are working daily to be strong partners of all the NATO countries. Hopefully soon, part of EU, for which we started to fight really since hundreds of years ago. And we are part of Europe. You know, we are not part of European Union as such, but Albania feels strong as part of EU. We have done a tremendous change in the country in order to bring ourselves to the level of partnership and of membership of EU. And Albanians are. There are many reasons now to go to Albania. You can look for many investment opportunity. You can look at openness in the country. It's so nice and fun to be with the Albanian people.
Right.
And we are beautiful people, and we are young, and Albanian people speak freely so many languages. And generally it's no accent to speak the languages, because we have 36 letters. It's the same Latin alphabet. But because the language is so developed and very difficult to learn, actually, it's very easy for us to speak foreign languages. For the moment, a good part is because it's probably they go in the region, they go to Albania, and we're trying to increase the number of people who go there because they want to go to Albania. The first phenomenon is a lot with Albanians who live and work abroad. Right. Because the great development connections and professional development they have reached, people around them try to go to Albania because they want to see the country. They hear so beautiful things about that, and
so that's next on my list.
It's you should do that actually, and not only you alone.
Well, yes, because I mean, oh my gosh, I've been to Greece.
There are so many stories of Albania people.
So many stories that I've heard, and
people don't know.
Beautiful people, and
for example, do you know the relation between Albania and Jewish people?
Right. Of course, with northern Ethnos and northern.
The Second World War II.
Right.
In the beginning of the war, Albania had 200 Jewish people, and at the end of the war, we had 2,000. And Albania is the only country.
I did not know that.
There were no Jews who were killed in the World War.
I had not known that.
Because they were Jews.
That's unlike
Not
Greece.
one.
Wow.
And I like the expression someone said, in Albania they were living in an open secret. Why we say that? Because as every story about how they made it in Europe, when families were helping them, they had to stay in the basement, hidden from the other families. But in Albania they lived open to society. And this is part of many welcoming stories I can say about Albania.
What a history, and thank you. And I want to bring you back.
Okay.
We have to finish. We have more to talk about.
It is very difficult to
hear. I know it's a lot to put into one.
But I have a chance to say hello to the Albanian community that lives in this neighborhood. And thank you so much for bringing me to the show.
Thank you. You are watching The Next Word. You can see us every night except Thursday. Thank you. Have a great evening. Good night.